Case number 1 is that of Lackawanna Hannah. The streets of Rochester have a way of remembering the names of the fallen, but few stories carry the heavy, suffocating weight of the betrayal that unfolded on Lyell Avenue. It was May 2024, a time when the air should have been turning sweet with spring, but instead, it was thick with a tension that had been simmering for hours. Lackawanna Hannah was a man who let a bruised ego become a death warrant. It started with a petty argument on a porch, the kind of verbal sparring that happens 1,000 times a night in any city. But for Hannah, those words didn't dissipate into the night air. They took root. He walked away, but he wasn't going home to cool off. He was moving with a singular, dark purpose. When he returned at 1:30 in the morning, he wasn't looking for an apology. He was looking for an ending. The group on the porch never saw the shadow approaching. Maris Chambers, a woman with a life full of unwritten chapters, was the first to fall as Hannah unleashed a hail of lead. The chaos that followed was a symphony of screams and shattering glass. But the most chilling chapter of this nightmare happened behind closed doors. Hannah didn't just stop at the porch. He kicked his way into the sanctuary of a home where children were sleeping, innocents who were about to have their world tilted on its axis. He hunted down his own longtime friend, Jared Perry, chasing him through the hallway like a predator in a fever dream. To execute a friend in front of children is a level of depravity that leaves a permanent stain on the soul. Hannah's flight to Texas was a desperate attempt to outrun the ghost of the man he used to be, but the system eventually caught up. Now, with 34 years to life ahead of him, he has nothing but the silence of a cell to answer the screams he left behind on Lyell Avenue. Case number 2 is that of Thomas Johnson III. There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a city when a protector is taken. On September 3, 2014, that silence was deafening. Officer Daryl Pearson was more than just a badge. He was a father of 2, a veteran, and a man who walked the thin blue line with a sense of duty that felt ancient. Thomas Johnson III was his polar opposite, a man whose life was a revolving door of bad decisions and a desperate need to stay out of the cage. When their paths crossed on Hudson Avenue, it wasn't just a police interaction. It was a collision of 2 completely different worlds. The foot chase was a blur of adrenaline and asphalt. As Pearson closed the gap, the distance between life and death narrowed to a fraction of a second. Johnson, fearing the return to prison more than he valued human life, reached back and fired. He didn't just strike a man. He struck the heart of a community. One bullet tore through the peace of the neighborhood, hitting a bystander, while another found its mark in Pearson. The aftermath was a frantic, blood-soaked attempt to save a hero, but the damage was done. The city watched in agony as the news broke that Pearson wouldn't be going home to his infant child. In the courtroom, the air was thick with the collective grief of hundreds of officers. Johnson's defense of an accident fell flat against the cold reality of his actions. He was handed a sentence of life without the possibility of parole, a final judgment for a man who thought he could shoot his way out of responsibility. He will grow old and wither behind bars, while Daryl Pearson's name remains etched in stone, a reminder of the ultimate price of service. Case number 3 is that of Takita Hendricks. Revenge is a fire that rarely stays contained, and Takita Hendricks proved that it can incinerate the very heart of a city. Driven by a distorted sense of loyalty and a thirst for vengeance after an alleged assault on her father, she stepped into the role of judge, jury, and executioner. She didn't use a gun or a knife. She used a match and a canister of accelerant, turning a duplex on Portland Avenue into a death trap in the dead of night. But the most haunting part of this tragedy wasn't just the fire. It was the fatal miscalculation that led her to the wrong door. Inside that home, 5-year-old Malachi Stovall was tucked into the safety of his bed, unaware that a stranger's grudge was about to turn his world into an inferno. The fire spread with a terrifying speed, fueled by old wood and Takita's malice. By the time the sirens wailed down the street, Malachi was already fighting a losing battle. The images of firefighters carrying his small, charred body out of the wreckage are burned into the memory of everyone who stood on that sidewalk. He lingered for 3 agonizing days, his body a map of 75% burns, before finally letting go. Takita Hendricks wanted to settle a score, but instead, she became the architect of a nightmare. Her 25-year to life sentence is a small consolation for a family that now has a permanent, hollow space where a bright, energetic little boy used to be. She is a haunting example of how street justice is often nothing more than blind, senseless slaughter. Case number 4 is that of Brandon Washington. To understand the darkness of the Rochester streets, you have to look at the men who profit from the chaos. Brandon Washington, known to the underworld as BMAC, didn't just sell drugs. He managed an empire of misery. He operated with the cold efficiency of a CEO, turning residential neighborhoods into high-volume distribution hubs and protecting his profits with a small army of enforcers. But beneath the flash and the money was a rot that was destined to collapse. His turf war with a rival gang didn't just claim the lives of street soldiers. It brought the war to the very doorstep of the law. The ambush on Bauman Street was the breaking point. While investigator Anthony Mazurki-Wicks and his partner sat in an unmarked van, doing the quiet work of trying to stop the bleeding in the community, one of BMAC's imported hitmen decided to open fire. It was a cowardly, blind attack that stole a 20-year veteran from his family and his city. The federal crackdown that followed was relentless, dismantling Washington's operation piece by piece. In the end, the kingpin was reduced to a man in a jumpsuit, offering a whispered apology to a widow in a crowded courtroom. That apology couldn't bring back a fallen hero, and it couldn't undo the years of addiction and violence Washington had fostered. His sentence of nearly 22 years in federal prison marks the end of a reign built on blood, leaving the streets a little quieter but forever scarred by the shadow of BMAC. Case number 5 is that of Dimitri Cash and Jothan Cash. Family is supposed to be a sanctuary, but for Dimitri and Jothan Cash, it became a blueprint for terror. When Dimitri's biological children were placed in a foster home, he didn't see a system trying to protect them. He saw a personal insult that required a military-grade response. The abduction in Greece, New York, was not a crime of passion. It was a cold, tactical assault. The cousins dressed in gear designed for combat, storming a quiet home and binding a terrified foster mother with duct tape before disappearing with the children into the night. But as the FBI and local police tracked them across state lines, they realized the abduction was only the first phase of a much darker plan. Dimitri had compiled a hit list, a literal manifest of murder targeting the family court judge who had dared to rule against him. He wasn't just a father trying to get his kids back. He was a domestic terrorist plotting to decapitate the local judicial system. The recovery of the children in Alabama was a miracle, but the discovery of the cousins' intentions sent shockwaves through the state. The legal system responded with a fury that matched the crime. Dimitri was handed a staggering 115 years to life, while Jothan received 75. It was a historic sentence for a historic betrayal of the social contract, ensuring that these two men would never again have the chance to turn their personal grievances into a public bloodbath. Case number 6 is that of Black Jules. There is no way to prepare for a monster that strikes without reason. Black Jules was a man who moved through the world with a hidden blade and a mind that had long ago severed its connection to empathy. He was a repeat offender, a man who had been given multiple chances to walk a straight path, but on a random Friday in October, he chose to walk a path of blood instead. He didn't target rivals or enemies. He targeted anyone within reach of his knife. David Oquendo was the tragic face of this senselessness. A 24-year-old man with a smile that lit up rooms, David was simply standing at the wrong place at the wrong time. With no warning and no exchange of words, Jules plunged a knife into him, ending a promising life for absolutely nothing. The spree continued through the transit center, leaving the downtown area in a state of panicked lockdown as police hunted a ghost with a blade. When Jules was finally captured, there were no answers, only the cold, hard facts of a life stolen. The 52-year-to-life sentence provided a sense of security to a rattled city, but it offered no explanation for the void left in the Oquendo family. It remains a chilling reminder that sometimes evil doesn't have a motive, it just has a target. Case number 7 is that of Jermaine Williams. The Rialto Street shooting is a story of how a single moment of uncontrolled rage can ripple outward until it drowns an entire community. It began at a concert, a place of shared energy and music, but for Jermaine Williams, the music was drowned out by a dispute that followed him into the street. He didn't leave his anger at the door. He let it fester until it exploded in a residential neighborhood. He didn't care who was in the way when he pulled the trigger. He only cared about exerting his dominance. Timothy Chile and Shatina Jones were the collateral damage of that ego. They were bystanders, people with families and dreams, who were silenced forever by a man who saw a crowd as a shooting gallery. The pain of their loss was so intense that it couldn't be contained within the walls of a funeral home. During Williams' arraignment, the courtroom itself became a battlefield. The families, pushed past the point of endurance, erupted in a violent clash that mirrored the chaos on the night of the shooting. It was a rare, raw glimpse into the total breakdown of order that follows such a senseless act of violence. Williams now waits in a jail cell, a man whose legacy is defined by the lives he took and the war he started in the very halls where justice is supposed to be found. Case number 8 is that of Terrence Lewis. We trust the law to be the final word, the ultimate weight that balances the scales of justice. But the case of Terrence Lewis is a haunting reminder that the law is a machine made of paper and deadlines, and sometimes the machine breaks. Lewis was a man a jury believed was a cold-blooded killer, responsible for the execution of Johnny Blackshell Jr. The evidence was presented, the witnesses spoke, and the verdict was clear: guilty. He was sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars. But while Lewis sat in a cell, his lawyers found a crack in the foundation. A clerical error involving the timing of his transfer between federal and state custody, a technicality known as the Interstate Agreement on Detainers, became his exit ramp. The appellate court's ruling was a dagger to the heart of the victim's family. The conviction was vacated, and the charges were dismissed with prejudice. It meant that even if the prosecution had a video of the crime, they could never try him again. Terrence Lewis walked out of prison a free man, a walking shadow of a system that failed to protect the memory of Johnny Blackshell Jr. It is the final, bitter chapter in a long history of Rochester crime. A story where the killer didn't win in the streets, but won in the filing cabinet.